Hi, it's Tegan. I wanted to share something from Ayurveda that has always resonated so deeply and been really helpful as something to carry in my awareness as we maneuver this modern day society. And it is a little corner of Ayurveda that can become really complicated, but in its most fundamental level, it's just a helpful awareness to carry. So what I want to talk about today is the misuse of the sensory organs. And the word in Sanskrit for this is Asatmyendriyarthasamyoga. It's a very long word, but it really does translate to the misuse of the sensory organs. And this is actually one of the causes of disease as defined by Ayurveda. So the reason I'm sharing this is because we all live in a very interesting time where there's a lot of stimuli and our sensory organs get a lot of action on a daily basis. And at times we're taking in things through our senses that we're not even really aware of, and in regards to how it affects our consciousness. So the senses themselves, most of them are on our head, right? Whether it be our smell, our eyes, our ears, our mouth, everything but the touch is actually on our head. And that's an important thing to recognize, because what lies in here is so much of what creates our reality. So the senses are the gateways to consciousness. They are the openings to the seat of consciousness, which is the mind. So what is coming through here, and the information or the stimuli that is coming through the senses, has a really big influence on our consciousness and therefore on our reality. So if we're taking in a lot through our sensory organs, a lot of information, a lot of graphic videos or loud sounds or things that just overstimulate us in any regard, it has a really big influence on our consciousness in ways that we might not even recognize. So there are three separate categories under this Asatmyendriyarthasamyoga. There are three different ways of organizing this overarching misuse of the sensory faculties. So these three are Ayoga, Ati Yoga, and Mit Yoga. And Ayoga is underuse, Ati Yoga is overuse, and Mit Yoga is misuse. And I want to just go into giving a few examples of each of these as it relates to the specific sensory faculties, to get you thinking about maybe ways that this is present in your life, and just to offer some awareness around what this might look like, and maybe how this might influence our consciousness. So for example, in regards to eye yoga, which is the underuse of the sensory faculties, this one's a little bit more I don't want to say uncommon, but it's a little bit more particular. So underuse might be something like, the first thing that comes to mind is underuse of the touch faculty. So for example, in children, right, or even in adulthood too, if we don't get enough physical touch, we don't receive touch, and there's an underuse of the touch itself and receiving affection in that regard, it can really affect us on an emotional level. There have been studies that show that if children don't get enough physical affection and care, it really does affect them on a developmental, psychological level. And the same thing with adults, right? I think something interesting about the time we're in right now is how much, at least it's made me aware of the necessity for hugging and to have that physical touch and connection. It really does affect us emotionally. And I'm sure we've all been through phases or windows of our life where we haven't received enough or as much physical care that we would like to, and we feel the effects of that. So that's one example there. Some other more specific examples of Ayoga that are discussed in the Vedic texts are underuse of the hearing faculties, being those who are hard of hearing or are deaf, and in regards to eyesight, those of us who have really poor eyesight or are blind, there is an effect on consciousness when those senses are weakened or underused in that regard. So that's more of a biological perspective of it. But you might start thinking about ways like, what else would that look like? For the taste faculty to be underused, or for hearing or for eyesight to be underused, or for the voice itself, right? I think that there's an interesting practice when taking a vow of noble silence, which a lot of monks do, that they don't use their voice for long periods of time, and that actually does at times have a detrimental effect on their vocal cords. So it's just interesting to think about in that regard. Underuse of the smell faculties, like just thinking about what that might look like. But to get more specific into some awareness that I carry around these a lot now that I've become aware of this concept, the overuse of the sensory faculties really, I walk with that a lot. And it's helpful because when you become aware of something, then you're able to perhaps pull back in ways or make shifts around it that feel a little bit more supportive. So specifically for me, and perhaps some of you resonate, overuse of the eyes and eyesight, especially in regards to screens, right? So Hatha yoga of eyesight is a big one, I think, for our day and age, where we're on screens all the time. Maybe we're even like reading on a screen, reading in a book. We're using our eyes a lot. And a really helpful practice for kind of like mitigating this or bringing this back into balance is eye cupping, right? So just giving ourselves a few moments to cover the eyes in complete darkness and let the eyes rest, so that we're not just exhausting our eye faculties, right? And another helpful thing to do here from an Ayurvedic practice is to spray a little bit of rose water, just organic, 100% rose water spray in the eyes can really help to rejuvenate them. I do it every day. If there's a day that I'm on my laptop a lot, I like to spray the rose water in the eyes just to kind of reset and make sure that they're not getting depleted. There was a time in my life where I was on the screen a lot for school, and it actually, I started to get a little rash because it really was Hatha yoga. I was just overusing my eyes, especially in regards to the blue light of the screen. So it's just something to be mindful of, and it's helpful, right? Because once we recognize whoa, my eyes are tired and it's probably because I'm overusing them, we can just know to maybe engage with some of those practices that help us to mitigate that a little bit. Hatha yoga of hearing is also a big one, I think, in this day and age, and in general, right? Because I think, I don't know how often, at least myself personally, I don't sit in silence very often. I'm usually listening to music in the car, talking all day long on phones and meetings, and there's very little time that I'm actually in true silence during my day. And maybe some of us are also the same way. So this overuse of the sound, right, the hearing faculties, can be considered just too much information and stimuli coming in there and not enough silence. So one way to really balance and anchor this is by giving yourself maybe 10 minutes a day or in between meetings, right, where we just sit in complete silence and let our system reset. And I'm sure we all know that feeling where we just take a minute, we drop in, and we stop all the stimuli and we let that peace wash over us and we let our consciousness rest for a little while. It works wonders if we practice a little bit each day. So all of this is to invite that. Where can there be more peace and presence? And where can you give your consciousness a break for a moment, right? And another great one is if you're going to drive home from work or something like that, what if you drove in silence? What if you didn't turn the radio on, and just let yourself be in presence with you and your breath and driving, and that's it, no more stimuli coming in through the ears. These are just little concepts to play with if you feel called. And in terms of overuse of the taste and the smell faculties, with smell, this can be a particular one, but if we're the type of person that burns a lot of incense and has a lot of candles and perfume and all this stuff, a lot of scent can really mess with our brain. And I'm sure we've all experienced when there's like too much perfume in a place and it kind of gives you a headache. This would be that kind of thing, just too much coming in through the nose itself. In terms of taste, the classic texts make reference to like too much taste being just eating too much, and there being too much of the mouth itself and all of that being used. And in terms of touch, this is an interesting one. I don't know, perhaps it's too much physical affection. There may be other ways, and if you come up with ideas, I'd love to hear, but these are all examples of ati yoga, or overuse of the sense faculties. And the last one I wanted to discuss was mit yoga, which is misuse. And misuse in this regard is specifically in relation to watching things, listening to things, experiencing things in general that can be detrimental or just too harsh on our consciousness. And, unfortunately in this day and age, we have access to a lot of stuff that can be considered misuse in the traditional regard. And for example, something that my teacher Rosie shared with me is that this can be considered like watching really violent or graphic films in terms of misuse of the eyes, like seeing things that could be considered kind of traumatic for our mind. These really gory movies that we have access to, or just like scenes on TV that are things that our consciousness is like very tender. So taking in those visuals can be considered misuse for our consciousness, right? And it does affect our consciousness. I don't know if anyone has experienced this, but sometimes when I watch a scary movie or a graphic film or something that has some scenes in it that are just really a lot to witness, especially if I watch something like this before bed, it can really mess with my dreams. It can really mess with my sense of peace, So these are just things to keep in mind. Like, am I seeing things that are maybe like a little bit too tender maybe my consciousness is too tender for this, and I'm just not really considering the effect that it has on my mind. Another example of mit yoga of the hearing faculties is listening to like music that is like really intense and loud, or maybe has like a lot of swearing, or some stuff that's like harsh to listen to. This could be, I think this is maybe more ati yoga, but like going to a concert with like really loud music and that kind of thing, and you like blow your eardrums out, that could be overuse of the hearing faculties. But just to give you some ideas there, I think like listening to songs with really explicit content would be considered misuse of the hearing faculties. And that's just, none of this is to say like you shouldn't do that, but it's just to consider how does that have an effect on our consciousness? Like, what are we allowing into the senses, and how does that shape our reality in here? How does that shape the well-being of our mind? So if we're watching a lot of TV, or we're never giving our eyes a rest, we're never giving our hearing a rest, how does that influence our mind, right? It's just something to think about. And I think about it quite often, and it's helped me to know when to take a break from the screen, or to drive home in silence, to give myself those moments of peace, because I'm aware and I'm conscious of how that affects the well-being of my mind. So I wanted to offer that because it's been helpful for me over the past few years, and it's just a good awareness to carry, because really it is, there's the nourishment of the physical body, right? There's the literal food that we put in our bellies, but there's also the nourishment of the mind, and the food that we feed our mind in that regard is really translated through the sensory organs. That's how we eat and ingest our outside world. So it's just something to think about. Maybe how are you nourishing your mind, right? And how are your sensory faculties, how are they doing? How are they eating and feeding your mind? So I hope this was helpful in some regard. I'm curious to hear if you have any thoughts on it. And yeah, Asatmyendriyarthasamyoga. If you want to know what that word is, I can type it out too. Thank you for watching.